Welcome to the Ultimate Landscape CEO. This is a special podcast with two people, Loriena Harrington, Shanna Scordo. They'll introduce themselves shortly. Loriena is a longtime client of mine and also an associate who leads a couple of our great peer groups. Shanna is just someone who kicks butt. She's a coaching client and a peer group member of mine. We're going to talk about strong will. Strong women in lawn and landscaping. And specifically, we're going to tackle three topics. First, they're both going to share turning points in their lives as a woman at work, in the green industry, and even as a business owner, and the negative and positive situations and experiences they had that had a deep impact on them that you can learn from. And then we will talk about some of the barriers that they see in their own companies that they fixed, and also in other people's companies in the industry that get in the way of women having a career in our industry and really, embracing this industry as really an industry for them. So barriers from the field and with equipment and even attitudes and policies, you'll definitely learn from that part of the podcast. And then the third part, this is like a three-part podcast altogether, we'll talk about some of the things that they're doing, things they see other people doing, things that you can do to make your company more women-friendly. And we talk about recruiting tricks. And in the end, we give some predictions to the industries in terms of women's role in the industry. We talk about the female preponderance of seconds in command that we have seen, and really a lot of positives that we see for the industry. And I think you'll learn a lot from this podcast, whether you are a woman employee or thinking about getting into the industry, or a female business owner, or whether you're a guy trying to expand the workforce and availability for women to see your company as a place to work. We talk about strong will, as I said in the beginning, strong women in lawn and landscaping. It's also the name of the women's group we have put together within our peer group community, the Leader's Edge. And it's a place for women to really get together and not just kvetch or complain, but really talk about the issues and identify solutions and then bring those back to their company. So we're very solution focused. I think you'll really enjoy this podcast. Here you go. Welcome to the special edition of the Ultimate Landscape CEOs podcast. We have two awesome CEOs here, and we're going to talk about women in landscaping. We have Loriena Harrington, who owns an awesome business, and she'll tell you about it in a second. She's also an associate running our peer groups, so she's doubly awesome. And Shanna, who on her own is doubly awesome, a client and runs a great company. And so could you guys each introduce yourselves? Shanna, do you want to go first?
Sure. Shanna Scordo, Earthcraft Landscaping is the name of our company. I'm in Western Pennsylvania in kind of a rural middle market. I run the business with my husband, Aaron. We co-founded the business about 12 years ago, and we both had landscape contracting backgrounds from Penn State, and just realized that there was a need in our area after having worked for some other companies in the past. Kind of got jaded with the industry, felt like maybe we could do it a little bit different. And so we started with the end in mind, and we said we wanted to build something that would continue to last after we couldn't work in the business anymore. So we've been trying to stick to that, and we've been growing every year, and so far it's going pretty well.
You planned way ahead. Did you say till you couldn't work in the business at all, or did you mean in the field?
Well, I guess both. I had grown up in a family business and watched when my dad was ready to retire, and he didn't really have a lot of options for selling. And so that they had worked so hard to build, they didn't have, they didn't really have an exit strategy. And I just knew that I didn't want that to happen to us. And plus our big mission of why we do what we do is that we want to create great jobs in our area. Because in our area, they're kind of, you grow up here and you think, I have to leave to find a good job. So that was part of what I wanted to bring to our community, was to try to have good careers here that people could stick around and work. And so, someday we're not going to want to work anymore. And I don't want to have to close the doors and say, sorry, guys, go, find another job.
Great. Excellent. I love that why. Loriena.
Hi, Jeffrey. Hi, Shanna. My name is Loriena Harrington. I am the proud owner of Beautiful Blooms Landscape in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin. And I started our company in 2001. I had been on the career track to be a golf course superintendent. And after being blindsided a little bit with allergies to pollen and grass and such, I had to realign what my ultimate mission or goals in life were going to be. And I thought back to, as a youth, I had always enjoyed doing the side jobs of mowing the neighbors' lawns and working for private estates as I went through college on my own. So I decided to drum up that entrepreneurial spirit and bring it back, and opened up Beautiful Blooms as a sole proprietor up in Minnesota, and gave it a test run up there before I fully quit my job at the golf course. And then as I found success, I moved back to Wisconsin so I'd be closer to family. I didn't know much about operating a business. I had never worked for a landscape company prior. It was just an answer to a need. And that was, I needed to change career paths, but I still absolutely loved the horticulture aspect of things. So I figured that out one step at a time, and several mistakes later, I have found a lot of success of 22 years in business, and have surrounded myself with successful people close to me in my family and friends, my business, and in the networking that I've been afforded to do across the country. As I was given the opportunity, or looked for the opportunity to be an entrepreneur, one of the really cool things is you get to kind of design your own destiny to a point. And I didn't want to have a workplace that worked super long hours. I was always looking for that family balance. So that was something that we were able to design from the very ground up early on. So good family values in our company, finding ways to not work insane amounts of hours. And then the realization as time went on and we had more employees in our company was the awesome opportunity to be a mentor to young people and to help them navigate life and find out what their callings were. And it might not be landscaping, it often isn't, but to give them a fantastic work experience so that they can go out and be successful in whatever it is that they might be doing.
Nice. Excellent. So I want to tackle the women in landscaping issue from three angles. And I'm really hoping everybody's listening to this, because whether you were looking for, as an audience person, you're looking for inspiration from what these great leaders have to share, or, if you're a guy trying to figure out how to broaden your employee base, work pool, right? There's so many different angles here, how to raise up the professionalism of our industry, many great angles. And so I want to talk about first, it's like a 3-part podcast. First part, turning points in your own careers that impacted you positively or negatively as a female employee or career-minded landscape person or business owner. What are some of those turning points? And maybe we can just ping pong back and forth. You guys can each do one at a time. And I don't know if this is a turning point for you, Loriena, but I remember if you could kick off with a story about when you were on the golf course and you were taking care of everyone's business or everyone's gasoline. What was that? Or their oil, I should say.
Sure. So I was working at the time, I was about 13 years old, working at the local country club. And it was a Monday, as I recall, because the golf course was closed. There was no tournament that day. So the fleet of gas golf carts had to be refueled. And the superintendent of the ground staff came up and he showed me what to do. where the fuel tank was, and also where the oil was. And I had to check the oil level, just look at the dipstick, wipe it off, put it back in, then look at it and make sure that it was fine. And he showed me also how to top it off if it needed a little bit added. And there was just one oil can. I don't know, it probably held a gallon of oil. And after a few golf carts, I had gone through the gas checking and filling and the oil checking and filling. And I had to go back down to the service shed, which was across the golf course, to ask for more oil because I'd used it all. And the mechanic kind of looked at me sideways and asked a few questions, but then was satisfied and gave me more oil. And then not too much longer, a few more golf carts, repeat all of that. I had to go back and ask for even more oil. At this point, the superintendent overheard us and was very perplexed as to why I would be needing so much oil. And I assured him that I was following his directions, and I went back on my merry way. A third time, I had to go back and ask for more oil. At this point, the superintendent followed me back up to where I was working and had me show him exactly what I was doing. And to his dismay, he verified that all of the golf carts that I had been servicing were in fact dry of oil and did need oil added. And I was doing my job correctly, but he was very dismayed because all of the boys ahead of me for the weeks prior in the summer had been skipping that very important step of checking the oil. They were only filling them up with fuel. So he kind of patted me on the shoulder and said, good job, and then offered me a job on the ground staff because I was thorough and detailed and followed his directions.
There you go. I don't know if that really is a impactful story under this theme. Was it? Did that set the tone for you?
You know, it gave me the confidence when I did show up on the next season as the only and very young female on their staff to be able to pull my weight and just know with some confidence that I had a boss that believed in me. So I would say that it was definitely a turning point. My whole experience on the golf course, it spread over several years, but there were so many turning points in all of that, just having to prove my worth over and over again, but not in the sense, like I didn't know that that's what I was doing because I didn't have any prior experience to compare it to. It's just that looking back, I see that I really did have to prove my worth over and over again. And did at some point come to realize that I could very quickly prove my worth through my knowledge. I didn't have to be the physically strongest person, but if I was smart, then I could get the respect that I needed in order to successfully do my job.
Seems like the bar was low. All you had to do was keep the oil tapped off and you were good.
Follow the directions, right?
Shanna, we're just going to popcorn here. So what's one experience for you, positive or negative, that was the turning point in your thinking about the role of women in landscaping? Or you in the world of landscaping?
Will say that last part again?
I said, or just how that helped you form your own view of yourself in this business.
Sure. Well, Aaron told me that I should tell the story about the time that I threatened to almost beat a guy to death with a shovel, or threatened that I would beat a guy to death with a shovel because he had taken that shovel out of my hand and disempowered me when I was shoveling just fine. I don't know if that's the most impactful story to share, but it kind of leads into looking back at the different people that I've worked with over the years and the impact that those people have made on me. I had a handful of guys that really stood out over the years that didn't really think that women should be in landscaping, which was kind of something that blew my mind, especially at one of the companies that I'd worked for was a very successful, large company. And there was a guy there that was running commercial install jobs. And he made no secret about the fact that he did not think women belonged in the industry. And he was very, very vocal about it. And I was just blown away by it because I'd grown up in a family where we just worked. You know, we raised livestock. My mom was a farm girl. You know, my dad was raised by a really strong woman. And it never crossed my mind ever that I wouldn't be able to just hang in there with the guys and do whatever they do, because I always did. And so when I would come up against these people that were kind of like setting limits for me, imposing these limits on me, I was a little more fiery back then, and it kind of, it would get my hackles up, and I wasn't very diplomatic either. So, I sort of developed this kind of chip on my shoulder, this defense mechanism of, I'm going to prove to you that I belong here, and I'm going to outwork you, and I'm going to get as good as I can at everything. And so that's what I would do. And I think that a lot of women end up doing that. We have a lot of figuring out to have to do. We're usually having to work twice as hard to prove that we belong there at all. And so for me personally, I kind of had built this, like an armor, I guess, where I had become this really tough. I kind of realized it later, whenever I exited the world of landscaping for a bit, and I went and had a Mary Kay business, and I sold makeup. So it was a big departure, but it was a big change. I started meeting all these amazing women who were supporting each other and learning about all sorts of personal growth stuff. And I started to realize that I had developed this thick skin that was making me this kind of alpha female that I didn't intend to become. But I would sort of look at other women that weren't as hardened and toughened and trying to come into the field. And I didn't even really want to help them out that much, because I'm like, hey, I went through it. You got to go through it too. And but when I think it didn't have to be like that, when I look back now, but I'm really glad that I had those experiences that were bad with certain individuals that I worked with, because I learned so much about what I don't want my workplace to be. And it's helped me that whole experience has helped me to just see through, through my own experience, what a lot of women go through just trying to get through those barriers in this industry. And it's no secret, it's no surprise, or it shouldn't be, that we have women that come in the industry and they don't stick around. And, when you start to recognize that and call that out, then you can start to figure out what you can fix.
So you're saying that you could have helped more women along the way earlier on, and you didn't. But
right.
Now you are. And we'll get to that in a second. I want to kind of mentalize a little bit here. But since you brought up Mary Kay, I'm going to let you finish telling that story.
Okay.
And then we'll popcorn over to Loriena. But so Mary Kay looks very like they give away pink Cadillacs, is it? Pink cars? Mm-hmm. It looks very feminine from the outside, but is it in fact, like, tell us what it's really about and how it impacted you.
Sure. So I never thought that I would end up selling makeup, but the business plan is pretty cool. It's a multi-level marketing company. It's been around forever. Mary Kay Ash, who started it, was a single mom, and she was a really sharp businesswoman. And I mean, she started it in, I can't even think if it was the 50s, maybe she had started it in. And that was, what she was doing was unheard of. She was just it was groundbreaking in the way that she formed her business. And she was just a really tough, interesting woman. And so she built the business with the intention of helping other women like her who maybe didn't have a way to earn an income to be able to do that. And so, you bought the product at wholesale and you sold it at retail, and you made your margins. You learned a lot about running a business. But there were all these conferences and things that we would go to, and it was a lot of like rah-rah, building each other up. But I guess I don't know what all you want me to go into with it.
Well, just how it impacted you positively or negatively about women in business.
Oh, so when one of the things that they always encouraged you to do was they introduced me to like John C. Maxwell and Dale Carnegie and all of these authors of personal growth type books. And so I just sort of immersed myself into that. And it totally opened up my mind to, how you can grow as an individual, and watching all of these women go out there and just hustle. Some of them, it was a side gig. Some of them, they just did it for, fun money. Some of them, it was their full-time thing. And I mean, there were women that were making millions of dollars every year running these businesses. Now, that was not the typical thing, but they were really successful. And being around them, I realized that, I had distanced myself from women. And because I guess because I had this thing to prove, I just sort of buried myself into it, and kind of lost touch with who I was, and with the woman side of it. Like you end up just trying to prove that you're as good as the guys, and you almost become one of the guys, and that's okay. But it does you a disservice if you lose touch with all of the stuff about being a woman that makes us special and that helps us to bring something different to the table. So, I kind of lost that identity, that side of my identity, while I was trying to prove myself. And so by meeting all of these amazing women in Mary Kay and watching them be as feminine as they wanted to, and also be successful, I realized that there was no reason why I couldn't do that in my own business.
Did you win a pink Cadillac?
I earned the first tier of car, which at the time I think was a Pontiac Vibe.
Was it a pink Pontiac Vibe?
No, it was silver. I took the cash though. You could get a cash equivalent each month. So I did that instead.
How many tiers of cars were there?
3.
Well done.
Thank you.
Loriena, do you have another story to share? A turning point that impacted you positively or negatively about you in the business world or you in the landscape world?
I do. So this was back in 2007 or 5, somewhere in the early 2000s. And my husband was working with me in the company, and we knew that we needed to get ourselves networked with our community, with our landscape community, because we were really isolated. I said earlier, I had never worked for a different landscape company before, and I was new back to Milwaukee, even though I was raised here. I had moved back, so I really didn't know anybody locally, and I was just looking for a sense of community. Opened up a trade magazine and saw an advertisement for a course that was going to help us understand our business. So we both signed up for that, and attended it, and it was in Louisville, not part of GIE. It was a different conference, and I don't think they're operating anymore. So attended that, and we only made plans to attend the pre-conference, this educational session, because we didn't have it in the budget for anything more than that. And while there, this wonderful woman, the first name Wanda, and I don't know anything more than that, but she insisted that we stay for the full conference. And that really was a pivotal moment, to have, it could have been an invitation from a male, maybe would have had the same impact, but Wanda came right alongside us and was just so generous and knew the right people to make it possible for us to attend that conference. And it was just like jumping in the deep end, but yet we had been waiting in the shallow end for years. And finally we got to make some great connections.
Got it.
The education aspect for me is really important. That has been what has always helped me get across a hurdle, or to meet more people that can help me move forward in the business. And I try to do that for all of my employees now.
So I'm hearing stories here, both things that might have put a chip on your shoulder. I mean, a positive, like, to spur you forward. Don't want to be like those guys or prove those guys wrong. And then I'm also hearing sort of attractive stories that really empower you and bring you forward. That reminds me of, Shanna, the story that you told, and I think I wrote about it in one of my newsletters, about your work that you do at Penn State with the young women there. Do you want to share that?
Sure. Yeah. I don't know how many years ago it has been now. We were visiting Penn State and visiting with our professors, talking with the class. And I realized that there were not very many women left in the major. When I was in there, we were probably about 25 or 30% of us were women, and the class sizes were bigger at that time, before the recession had happened. And so when I noticed that there weren't that many, and I mentioned it to the professors, and Dan Stearns had said, it's a shame because they don't really have peers. Like they don't have female peers to be able to, group up with. And I got this idea of, well, if only I had some women in front of me whenever I was in school, I would have been able to, maybe it would have helped me to be able to think about, like, to picture myself being successful or higher up in businesses. But I only ever saw men coming in and recruiting. And so I never really had somebody to connect with on that level. And so I offered to come in and start, sit down and talk with them. There's a lot of barriers that I think we'll talk about later in the podcast here, of things that you kind of have to be prepared for. And if you know how to navigate them, they're not so bad. But, and I don't want to go into those because I know you want to talk about those later. But I figured, it would be helpful if I could just kind of have open sessions with them and just sit down and be like, hey, what questions do you have? What concerns do you have? Have you thought about these different things that are challenging for us as women? Here's the straight talk on it. Here's what you need to be prepared for. And then, hey, do you have any ideas on how, this industry could be different as well, so that we can start kind of like paving the path of how do we get more of us to come into the industry, and how do we get more of us to stay in the industry? And so I tapped into a couple friends that I had graduated from Penn State with, Lori Henry, who works at Penn State physical plant, and my friend Angela Barr, who works for Eichenlaub in Pittsburgh. And so the three of us would sit down with them every so often and just talk with these women. We had some from the turf major, and some from horticulture, and some from landscape contracting. And we had these fantastic roundtable discussions, and we just kept it very light and open, and just kind of shared stories of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened. Here's this crazy thing. These are the things you can expect, but then also lots of positive stories. And so, we really formed these nice bonds with each other, where if they want to reach out to me with an email or a phone call, they're welcome to do that. And it just becomes a nice networking, system for them to be able to tap into.
Let's jump to part 2 of the podcast, some of the barriers that you both see in, I'll presume, other companies or in the industry, or maybe barriers that were in your company towards attracting and or retaining women in our workforce. Shanna, since you've got a list, I know you prepared. Why don't you start with one, and then we'll popcorn back and forth between you two. So what's one of the barriers you see?
One of the biggest ones I think exists, and it's not just for women, I want to be clear on that, but it's enforcing a really inflexible schedule where we have these very early start times and then these very muddy end times. That's hard if you have kids and you're the primary caregiver, which not unfortunately, but statistically for women, they're the default caregivers. And, if they have a spouse, that person a lot of times is working a job where they don't have flexibility either. And so somebody has to be home on time to get the kids, somebody has to be able to be there, or you're hiring for childcare. So I think that a way that you can overcome that is by offering maybe some job sharing, getting a little bit flexible on start times, getting more firm maybe on end times. It's different for every business, but those are some things that we're experimenting with.
Okay. Loriena, what's a barrier that you see?
Another barrier that I would see is the work itself has been historically done by men. So the equipment to do the work has been designed for men. And that's been a problem for me firsthand that I've experienced. And I know that having a company that has more than 50% women, that's still a challenge. I would also just say ditto to Shannon that's my number one, is the flexibility and schedule. If you want to attract more women who are usually the caregivers in a family, whether it be for their children or for aging parents or relatives, that flexibility is key.
Okay. Tell us, what tools, Shanna and Loriena, which tools do you see in their equipment need to get redesigned or dealt with in some way?
Sure. So the height of equipment or the positioning of seats in, for equipment that you're riding the adjustment of seats to where the pedals might be for controls, that it's not impossible to reach, but stretch or reach your board, which puts you out of position from what the manufacturer and designer of that equipment intended, which leads to a safety concern. So it's not always that the equipment can't be operated, but there's some sacrifice of either efficiency or safety or both in how the equipment has to be operated. And safety isn't always the acute injury that can happen, but it's the fatigue, it's the ongoing different position. So now it's not ergonomically correct, and chronic injuries. So it's a little bit vague, but if you walk the trade show at GIE, I would say all.
I would agree completely. And I'll piggyback on that too. The fatigue part of it. I know with the mowers that we have the Right Stander X mowers, and we love those mowers. Our guys love those mowers, but our ladies find that the way that you have to squeeze the handles to propel it forward is really fatiguing for someone that has small hands. It's designed for someone with large hands. Right. And also there's a weight minimum. I don't know if you don't read your manual, you might not know that, but 120 pounds is the minimum weight on a mower like that. And I kind of think, well, why? There's got to be, surely they could design that, differently. So the other thing that the ergonomic piece that you mentioned, Loriena, is with weed eaters, I find especially like the steel weed eaters that everybody uses, they're so heavy and so long. And when you have a smaller frame, the way, even when you have that strap, you just can't quite position it right to be able to, just let it hang on you. And the upper body strength that you need for running that all day, they're just not designed with that in mind. So we've been looking at battery powered options and things, but backpack blowers would be the other one I would mention because they're very, very heavy. And the battery powered ones honestly aren't a whole lot lighter. So I'm sure you're going through the same thing. You're like looking everywhere to find stuff that's going to be efficient, that's going to do the job as quickly as your other stuff does, but that people can wear safely. And it's not just the women that suffer from it. It's smaller statured individuals, period. And also anybody that's a little bit older. And really, I mean, why wouldn't we want our people to have equipment that's as light as possible, as easy to run as possible, as safe as possible?
What do you two girls think about bathrooms?
Oh, yeah.
So
that's, go ahead, Lorraine. I'll let you take that.
Right? We address it in our company is that we're a maintenance company, so we're traveling on a route through the day. And we give our team understanding and permission to stop and use a public bathroom wherever they find convenient, but not out of the way. So a lot of times they'll be going to a fuel station or to a fast food place to use a bathroom. And it is what it is. Like we don't dock them for it. We, insist that they use a proper bathroom, that there's no compromise there. And that's for men and women. Women have more needs than men, but we insist that both use a proper bathroom.
It's funny because I think back to my first couple of jobs and I don't remember where I went to the bathroom because nobody talked to us about it. Nobody gave us an option. We were a lot of times on a site all day long, nowhere near. So I think I just didn't drink is what probably happened. So that didn't have to go. But in our company, we've kind of gone through different iterations of how we deal with it. And in the beginning, we didn't really have any female employees. And I'll say that, you kind of just make do on the site, however you need to. We've boxed trailers and, I won't go into detail, but once we started having other women coming on, I realized I can't expect other people to do that. And so same thing with what you're saying, Loriena, we do maintenance and install. So there are times that they're on a site and they're not anywhere near a bathroom. So we try to get permission from the clients to be able to use the restrooms. And they're usually great especially if they see a woman on the crew, they'll say, hey, if you want to come use my bathroom, that's fine. But we've been trying to be more proactive about that and saying, either we need to put a porta john on your site and that's going to be part of your job cost, or if you have a restroom they can use, then I don't have to put that into your job cost. But we make a point that any women that we hire, I sit down with them and have like the talk at the beginning of the year to just get real with them and address those concerns that they're going to be too embarrassed to ask their crew leader if that person is a man, especially. So that, and then also just with what Loriena was saying, being understanding when you see your truck is stopped at a gas station and not getting on their case about it. And the crew leaders that we have that are male, they are really great about if a woman on their crew or anybody on their crew comes up and says, "Hey, I need to go to find a bathroom." They're like, "Take the truck, go do what you need to do." It's kind of a 2-part thing, getting the guys to understand it and then getting the women to feel like they're empowered to ask for what they need.
Gotcha.
I think that the solution to the issue was to make it not an issue.
Yeah,
it didn't need to become a hurdle. It just needed to be, I guess, addressed to give permission and understanding that, yeah, of course you have to go to the bathroom. So do I,
and so do guys, right? Like guys have to go to the bathroom too. So really, if you make it not gendered, it's a human issue, not necessarily a woman issue.
So what about some of the guys I talk to that say, we treat everybody the same when we're on a job site? The women have no problems going off into the woods and going pee. How do you respond to that?
I say, are you sure?
Yeah.
I think we make a lot of assumptions. We're guilty of it too. Even though we're women, I make a lot of assumptions. And until I ask, I don't really know what they think. So, start those conversations and encourage them to really be honest. And you might find out what you think is okay isn't okay. And maybe the guys don't like it either.
Yeah. Plus women have more needs, like you said.
Well, sure. Yeah. So there's more hygiene needs for women that men don't have. And that is extra challenging. So the solution is making bathrooms available for everybody.
All it takes is one bad case of poison ivy.
Let me segue to maybe bigger barriers. We held our first Strong Women in Lawn and Landscaping luncheon, and you two led that along with Corrine. What were some of and so we gathered, just for the audience's sake, we gathered women from our entire peer group community, whether you're an owner or an employee. Maybe 20, 25 people came to this event in New Orleans this January. So what were some of the barriers that you heard from them besides these sort of more obvious ones?
Some of them are really simple, like uniforms are ill-fitting. That makes a big impact if you can offer different choices of size and fit. Several people mentioned that.
Policies about either medical leave or maternity leave.
Mm-hmm.
And how, again, kind of going back to the previous part of our conversation, the flexibility with that, if moms have to pick up children from school because they're sick, how do you handle that? And not being reactive, but being proactive. That was a message that I heard in the room at that luncheon, was that the companies that were proactive, that had these policies already in place, and that was a much more desirable situation than feeling like they were being accommodated for in the moment and then viewed by their coworkers as, an exception is being made for that person because they're a woman, when it's the right thing to do, and it's just because they're human.
So you're both woman-run companies. What are some of the barriers you see in the more typical men-run companies?
I would say that, and this can happen anywhere, whether you've got women or men running the company, putting too many things into your job descriptions that maybe aren't 100% necessary. So statistically, women, when they apply for a job, they want to be able to say yes to everything on that job description, to say, yes, I can do that, or yes, I have experience with that. And men are much less likely to care about that. They're more likely to say, I can do, a good many of those. I'm totally qualified for this job. And And there's a whole bunch of science that goes into like how we end up that way as women, because we don't start out like that, but society kind of turns us into that. So if you have, for instance, lifting limits, like if you say you have to lift at least 80 pounds or 50 pounds, if that really is what that job description needs to have in it, then certainly it needs to stay there. But there are a lot of jobs that's really not the case. So can you reduce that? Can you hone it down to just the things you really need them to be able to do whenever they come in, and then take the rest of it and build it into a good training program and be able to train them up? Then you're probably, because if you're not doing that, you're probably filtering out more women from applying for that job than you realize.
What do you mean? I'm sorry.
It's because they're looking at that job description and they're not even going to apply because they see that big list and they say, oh, I can't do all of those things. I shouldn't even apply for this job. So you're narrowing your candidate pool because you're not thinking the way that they think.
So, this is interesting. So you're saying because women statistically want to be better prepared, the company needs better training programs to attract or at least retain women in these positions where we're having trouble finding people. So two pieces to that. The first one is you don't need to if you cannot require them to have to know all that stuff when you're in that job description, you can hone it down to just what you really, really need, and then be prepared to train them when they come on. Because it is a two-part solution. If you bring them on and you say, well, yeah, I only need you to do these two things, but actually it's a list of 20 and you're not prepared to train them, they're not going to stay. So yeah, you're going to get them in the door, but you won't keep them. But you're not even getting them in the door if your job descriptions are too lengthy with unnecessary fluff in them. Okay.
You know what I mean?
No, I totally do. Loriena, any insights on recruiting with women? I know you've shared some of that before.
Right. So we are clearly a woman-owned company, and my very first employee was female and my second employee was female, and that's just how it happened. It wasn't by design. But through the many years, things have fluctuated, and there were times when I was the only female in my company. And I never thought of it as anything special that we were a female-owned company. So on the advice of another worker, when we were having trouble finding people to apply, we advertised it that way, that we were a woman-owned company. And let me tell you, that job ad changed everything when it came to hiring people. We had more applicants that were female, far more applicants that were female than we had ever had before. And the quality of applicant, regardless of male or female, rose. And I'm not sure what the psychology there is, but it happened. The idea that, a male-owned company wouldn't be able to attract females, I think is a misguided conception. I think it needs to be touted, though, if you are trying to attract all employees, male and female, or all people to be employees at your company, that you have to be forward thinking. You have to be progressive in your stance about all of the topics that we've already covered, and put that into your job ad, that you are a progressive thinking company, that you welcome women to apply, that you have X, Y, and Z in place already, that they'll be able to find success within your company. An inviting company like that would be much more desirable for somebody to apply to than just, if you go to Indeed, the job ads, a lot of them are very generic and repetitious. So if you can make yourself stand out, you're going to attract a better caliber of person, I believe. Nice.
I like that. Better. So you brought in higher caliber women and men.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So if you're a man-owned company, but your leadership team is women, you could tout yourself as a woman-run company.
You could even tout yourself that you have women on staff. I don't think it has to be in the ownership level. I think it just has to be there. And to get your first female working for you, your first woman working for you, or let me just broaden that to say minority. your first minority to be working for you. I think you just have to be open to it and interview other people of that minority to find out what's important to them and what their value, like what values drive them to be motivated. And then incorporate those where you feel comfortable that fit your vision and mission of your company so that you stay true to yourself, but you start broadening who you would be hospitable to.
I think it's very, very hard when you're in the majority to understand the minority. And I think intellectually, we all think I'm open-minded or, I'm open-minded. I'm a good listener. But I think the whole definition of perspective is you're not them. It's impossible to really be in their shoes and to fully understand. And so I'm assuming, so if you're a guy, let's stick with men and women here. How do men overcome that? Do they have a advisory board of the 3 women in their company to review everything and look at it from the woman's perspective?
That's a start.
I think it's a great start. And maybe if you don't have anybody to start with, you ask outside perspective from other women in your life that you respect their opinion, and just ask them, run things by them. Hey, if this happened where you work, how would you feel about it? What would you change?
Yeah.
And I mean, spouses and partners of those that are working for your company already might have some wonderful insight as well. Just anybody in your, the sphere of influence around you that you trust.
And I would also add,
or this podcast.
I would also add that it's easy for women to get talked over in any kind of meetings. So if you bring women to the table and you ask their opinion, you need to actually actively listen to what they're saying. And then we tend to speak different languages as women and men. So, all those active listening techniques of repeating back what you're hearing, to ensure that you're understanding and demonstrating that understanding, and then figuring out what specific action items can you take that are going to drive change in whatever that area you're getting feedback on, so that you're not just hearing about it and being like, oh yeah, that is unfair. Okay. And then you move on with life and nothing happens. You have to start putting, your money where your mouth is.
So let's segue with these conversations to part 3 of what are some things that you're doing to make your company more woman friendly, attract more women, and or what are some things that you can advise other people to do? And so I know we've been sort of blending right into this. Who wants to start?
Just one topic at a time. We'll go back and forth here. We revamped our policies a couple of years ago, and I really did a deep dive and interviewed a couple of my employees to find out where the gaps were. And I was embarrassed to say that a lot of the gaps were around motherhood, because I'm not a mom. So that was a huge blind spot for me. And we started to incorporate that language and those policies into our handbook. So we now have a maternity and paternity policy and allowance for time off or understanding the flexibility, the whole schedule part. That's something that we put into place a couple of years ago in a much more robust way, a formal way, just talked about.
Something really simple that we did was to make sure that all of our trucks have running boards and ladders on them, because they didn't all have that. And for our head gardener is a woman, and she's very tiny, and she had a heck of a time climbing into our trucks. And she said, could we get some running boards? And so over the winter, Erin got the rest of them outfitted. And so now everything has that. And that goes a long way. It's not that expensive to do, and it made a big impact.
Nice.
That's for short people in general. I can tell you that personally.
Oh, yeah.
We allow all of our employees now have a full spectrum of pant colors that they can choose from. Prior to this, it was only tan, and that was problematic for certain reasons. So we allow tan, olive, dark brown, all the way to black. Like, what
Now
does
you're
it
just
matter?
going crazy, Lorena. That's
I know,
too
like,
far outside
whoa,
the box.
we allow different pant colors, but for uniform sake of being uniform, it was always a khaki pant, a light tan pant, and our uniform colored shirt.
So what's wrong with tan? Maybe I missed it.
The problem with tan is that women have other needs. So when it's the time of the month that somebody has their period and we're in active work environment, things can happen that become embarrassing.
Yeah. Okay. I thought, but I didn't want to assume. Okay. That's good to hear. We need to hear explicitly those things.
Okay. Should we start this podcast over?
Yeah. Maybe.
That'll be the second one.
Maybe we'll have to dub it.
Have subtitles to define what these actually mean.
Exactly
in plain
right.
speak.
Did we get two women down in the corner talking the whole time and like Shanna, what else?
Well, we've been intentionally trying to attract more women and then, hire them in. I think that subconsciously it's easy to discount a woman that applies for a field position for a lot of reasons. One can just be that, you think like physical strength and size or limitations, or maybe they have a limited schedule. And so maybe in the past, I would have just said like, well, that doesn't fit the mold of what we need and just not hire that person. But really making an effort to look at the situation and say, this individual is highly teachable. That the other piece of it I was going to mention is a lot of times they're coming to us without experience professionally because they've always dreamed of doing something in our field, but they didn't take that path because it didn't feel like they hadn't seen anyone that looked like them, a woman in that field doing that professionally for a living. And so they went on another path of something they didn't love to do. And so then they get to a point in their life where they say, I really want to make a change. I mean, we just hired our 6 new hires, 4 of them are women that came on. And so all similar stories, not a ton of background in it. And so we looked at them and said, they're very teachable, they're very trainable, they're very ambitious, they want to learn. Now it's our job to teach them and to do a little bit of accommodation of, some needs they have scheduling wise. And so then the more that I've found the more that we say yes to people in those types of roles, women in those types of roles, the more feedback that we get and the more that we learn and the more that we figure out how to make this a place where women can thrive.
I believe that once we have women working in our companies, it's really important that they not just, they were attracted to our companies for whatever it was that we were able to convey to them through a job ad or our websites or the interviewing process. But then it's really important that we have that be the reality for them as well. So what I'm going at here is when we hear, whether it be other employees within our team, it could be subcontractors that are not part of our company, but we're associated with them, vendors, anywhere that our employees are being exposed to other people that we have the expectation that they be treated well. And that goes with clients as well also. So if I hear that my employees, really whether they're male or female, but I feel like we've had some derogatory remarks made towards our staff from customers over the years. And my employees are looking to me as a leader to stand up for them. And if they don't see that, then I have to imagine that doesn't make them feel very good and they're apt to leave. So I have made it a practice that when I hear about those situations and then I take action, I share that with the team to let them know what it was that I stood up for. And that's been very empowering to them, that they know that they're working for a place of business that puts action behind their words.
I have some peer groups, Leaders Edge peer groups that have no women. And then we have a few that have a few women in it, which I like. We've just started the second in command peer group, and wow, what a great success that's been. It's 33% women, or it's almost 50%, but it's something like 33%, which is much more than what I just told you is the average in our peer groups. And I don't know what the average is in the industry. You two may know better than.
I don't know, but is it 12? I think we figured out in your peer group community, the business owners, it was maybe less than 10% women, I think overall.
Yeah.
But it's so exciting about the second in command having so many women in it.
Why is that? I put that question to you two. Why do you think?
Well, I know why it is. I think I know why it is anyway. So, and I've mentioned this to you before, Jeffrey, that within our peer group, I'll share this with the audience. There's three companies, three of us that are women-owned businesses, and it's really great because I get a chance to learn so much off of Almora and Kate that are in our group. But we also have a lot of really great men who are running fantastic businesses. And over, I've seen where they have a gap in something in their leadership, and they end up hiring a woman into that role, a smart woman in a leadership type role. And she just kills it. And she's just in there just making, just progress like crazy. And they all in the beginning seemed to be kind of surprised by this, like, oh man, she's doing so great. And then it would happen again and again. And pretty soon you get to where when somebody needs to fill a leadership position, they're like, can you find a woman for it? And so that's really cool to see that happening, where people are starting to recognize that how much impact a woman can make in those roles. And my theory for that is that they, as women in an industry like this, or any industry really, for you to climb to a leadership position, it takes a lot of extra effort. So there are a lot more barriers. You have to kind of go and figure stuff out on your own. People aren't always going to be teaching you. There aren't as many mentors for women. There's that good old boys club that we really are sitting outside of, and it's hard to get your foot in the door sometimes. So because there's all of that work that happens, by the time a woman gets to that point of being in a leadership role, she's amazing, because she's not just qualified, she's probably overqualified. And so she just ends up being dynamite in it. That's my theory anyway.
Okay. Better is better, huh? Better prepared is better.
Mm-hmm.
Loriena.
I don't know if I have a theory on this one. I just don't have a clear understanding of why that would be. I don't think it's unique to our industry is kind of where my head is at, is that that's not a unique thing to our industry. And there's far more men business owners than there are women business owners. And maybe that goes back to our societal expectations, and not just current generation, but for many, many generations, that women were the nurturers. They supported the household functions. And now, I say now, but really generations before me, even coming into the workforce, we're still the nurturers. We're still the supportive role. And I don't think there's anything it's not to be minimized. They might not have the title of owner, but they're still critically important to the success of those organizations. So I don't
tell you. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Just to finalize my thought there is, I don't think it matters if the woman in your organization is the owner, or if they're in a leadership position, it can have the same impact.
So these women are not, they didn't come up from the field. They don't need the technical skills. They need more management skills than technical skills. It is an organizing position. So on the one hand, they don't, just because our industry only has 12%, that's sort of independent from this position. They can come from the outside. Are women better organizers? Is that Or is that cliche?
Yeah, I don't think you can generalize on that. And I always hear that people will say like, well, women are better managers because they're nurturing. Well, I'm not particularly nurturing. So I always sort of like push back against that. I think that it comes down to this drive to prove ourselves and to achieve. And so there's a bit of maybe some issues that we have with things like perfectionism, anxiety, just, this feeling of we have to perform at a very, very high level because we worked really hard to get to wherever we're at. And so we have to continue keeping that, that level. I don't know if maybe comes back from feeling like it's been a journey just to be in the workplace for women to begin with, and then to be able to move into leadership positions, break that glass ceiling, et cetera, that maybe there's just this feeling of like, the carpet can be pulled out from underneath you if you're failing, that maybe the critical eye falls on you first because this imposter syndrome, feel like maybe you weren't supposed to be there, et cetera. There's all kinds of stuff going on in our psyche as women that you can read lots of research on. It goes back to an equal number of kids want to be president when they're in kindergarten, but by the time they get to high school, the female percentage drops drastically. There's a lot of science in there of why we're not groomed to be leaders versus how boys are. Mm. And there's a lot around the language that's used, assumptions that are made, directions we get pushed in. And some of those boxes come with names like nurturer and teacher and, whatever, supporter, whatever those things are. You're much less likely to look at a little girl and say, look at what a tough little thing you are. Look at what a leader you are. And then you're not going to look at a boy and say like, oh, you're so cute and beautiful. Do you know what I mean? So there's so much that happens at a young age and it continues through, and it's just part of society and it's hard to get rid of.
My youngest, my son is a natural leader, and we've told him that all the time. My daughter, however, we've told her she could be president because she's got that much ambition.
Uh-huh. It's awesome. That's awesome.
So let's wrap up here. Some predictions for the future. Any predictions that either one of you want to share on, since that theme is women in landscaping? You can share it on landscaping, but if you want to share it on the total theme, I'd like to hear what you have to say. Any predictions?
So I think you're going to see women explode into this industry before long. I really do. There's stuff that needs to happen first. You're not going to see it happen at every company, but just seeing the work that we were able to do within the Strong Will group and within the larger peer group, when we kind of shared, hey, here's some takeaways that we had, and just seeing light bulbs going on in a lot of the male business owners' heads where they're going like, I never even thought that was an issue. When they start to correct things, when you get this sort of en masse group of people that start to make changes and they start asking equipment dealers for things that fit a variety of body types and start asking their uniform providers for different body type uniforms, and that demand starts to grow, all of a sudden those barriers start to disappear really quickly. And so if we continue with that momentum just within our group, and then we're going to see that seeping into the rest of our industry too, and especially with the work that NALP does, on their end too. So I think that the more action we take to make this a good place to be for, men, women, non-binary individuals, all across the board. And then you can start to look at, diversity in terms of, race and background and everything too. The more diverse we can get, the bigger our candidate pool gets as well. So it's going to help to solve this issue that we have with recruiting. Because right now we're really cutting out an awfully big chunk of the population whenever we don't support the diversity that we could within our industry. So I have a very positive outlook on it. I think things are going to get much better.
Excellent. Loriena.
I would add to that, because I agree with everything you just said, Shanna. I think we're going to see the barriers drop as more people become aware of and acknowledge that they even exist. So the networking groups that are starting to pop up across the industry, I think are going to really be the voice, the charge, the energy that helps accomplish that. I like that that's happening. I didn't even know it was necessary. Again, it's my blind spot because I've been in this industry since I was 12. So I've never thought that it was necessary, but now that it's here, I was like, wow, this is so empowering. It's empowering to myself. It's giving me the motivation to welcome more women into the industry. And I think that's what's going to bring it full speed. Is there's a lot of simmering going on right now across the country. I'd be interested to know the statistic of how many companies have 0 females opposed to those that have at least 1. And yeah, I think that the statistics, the demographic is going to change significantly over the next 10 years.
Let's end with one more round. Give a tip to a woman who might be listening to this podcast, an employee, whomever she might be. Shanna or Loriena?
I would just say, be persistent, be determined, follow your own light. And if you're not finding a path forward where you're at right now, change course, but stay in the industry because there's a place for you.
Okay.
I'd say don't settle. Don't settle for treatment that's beneath you. Don't settle for subpar conditions in your working environment. You can either stay put where you're at and work to change the situation and to empower people around you with knowledge of, like you said, open your eyes to the blind spots, Loriena, right? You can either do that where you're staying in place and you're trying to, make change in the space that you're in. Or if that can't happen and you're feeling stuck, you need to go somewhere else and go somewhere that people are going to allow you to bring your full self to work as a woman and that where it's not a liability for you, but it's a strength.
Excellent. I appreciate both of you. Thank you for taking the time. I know you're both super busy. Loriena and Shanna, this has been excellent. And just want to thank you both for being in my world and for being on this podcast.
Thanks,
Thank you, Jeffrey, for allowing us to bring the female perspective to light within your community.
Amen.
For sure.
Thank you.
For sure.